let's move a sit down. Well, it's been a while, but since the Tokyo Game Show has passed by the time I upload this, not to mention that the voice acting for Limbus Company was dealt with, we can move on with this. Previously on Leviathan, Virgilius the Red Gaze and Gubo, an NCorp employee, found the cocoon of what used to be Garnet, the rookie fixer that was in that orphanage that Tolmeri attacked. While Gubo went to get the researcher Azia, which was the reason why he was there in the first place, Virgilius fought against the distortions that used to be some of the children that once lived in that orphanage. Distorted as byproducts of an experiment using the glass window technology, a rival to that of Yisang's mirror technology. Both could access parallel worlds, but were different enough. First he killed a grass-type Pokemon knockoff, then something out of a Tim Burton fever nightmare. Then Maestro Jumsun, after Azia focused all the rift generators on him, with the refraction index on maximum. This brought the mad artist into a cocoon, where upon hatching out, which resulted in killing a watery distortion by stepping on it, emerged as something out of shonen anime, with his left arm restored, and a reptilian form with many dots all over the body, the dots attacking Virgilius' mind like a psychic venom, all those different possibilities. It also made sure that his attacks were critical hits, although he had visions of alternative possibilities, including what would have happened if he didn't take Garnet with him, and left him with Yan Yen. He was remembering the days before the attack on the orphanage all during this. Then Maestro Jumsun made him seem like he was falling through different worlds in his mind. Then all was dark, and a voice from one that was familiar to this veteran fixer spoke to him again. And now, the continuation. We continue with perfect silence. One that Virgilius has not felt for some time. He announced himself as the owner of that space, as if he was buried in a light that was unrelated to what was happening outside. He asked who was talking. Then he realized that was a meaningless question. The voice told that it didn't matter. That they just wanted to talk. Yes, this caught his attention, as those that called him were no longer alive in the city. In fact, he didn't even have his red eye augmentations last time he heard someone call him that. Yes, the augmentation that enhances vision, and is not a sign that he's a blood fiend. Well, it's at least a world that he questions if it was greener than it was then. Well, at least less unlikely. If it was, it's not by much. This warm and cozy light was in front of him. that which appears as colours of light scattered endlessly in the city. An illusion that all faults can be removed. Then a face comes to mind, as if salvation is a heart that should not even be embraced carelessly. Yeah. That definitely sounds like that one. And it's their MO. At least when they were still a corporeal being. And this being saw both as each other's guests, wanting to ask something and expecting that he has something to tell them. Many questions go unanswered in the city. No one answered. At least not to Virgilius's knowledge. Questions like what? Why the back streets of District 23 are on the Texas Chainsaw Massacre plan? Why they don't question why children are taken by the sweepers alive instead of being eaten? Why J-Corp understaffs its casinos, besides them being stingy, of course. The voice spoke of his heart hurting, asking if the children that he didn't rescue were shaking their heads at him even in their current state. Virgilius was silent during this. This was significant enough to the voice, who considered them to be infinitely bright children, without any regret or pity in this voice. At least none that Virgilius could detect. Yes, she was referring to those that distorted. This much Virgilius understood. Then the voice said that it was too late. There was no going back for them. That spotless ignorance of the world made them difficult. And spoke of this in a cheerful tune, noticing his heart aching, which the voice pointed out, and he sensed this, and knew that he was quietly cracking inside, telling her that they ceased to be children after that happened. Then the voice continued in a warm voice, telling Ver that it's not his fault that this has happened, as if to console his sins, making him want to sit down without knowing it. He didn't see this as something to count on. The memories that he dug up, one by one, were tightly tangled. He woke up to a huge heap of guilt, that he didn't know where to begin with, how to understand it. Him, that chunk of the city. Well, as messed up as you are, Virgilius, at least you're not a psychopath. The voice told Ver to think about it, that the nursery school children are no longer what they were, that Garnet was in that egg. It was serious, but she saw it as a minor incident. Well, they're not wrong, as for someone like Virgilius, it's another day on the job. Or to put it in another way, for him, it's Tuesday. Although Virgilius saw it differently. Then the voice asked why he has more heartache, and Virgilius saw that voice as one that saw his facades, his life that he kept to himself, when blood didn't cover his eyes. What he'd been through up to that point. The voice watched this without revealing anything of what they were. He remembered his past, those crying for life, those unable to scream properly and were buried under that building that collapsed, bleeding life. Yes, the orphanage attack and the collateral damage. He saw the space of warm light, what he created, where joy and excitement could be heard instead of cries and clamors. Yes, this was indeed the orphanage, his hope, and the voice understood this. That he saw the city was hurting, that the stains on his hands were not washed away, as if he was in a certain play set in Scotland involving regicide, tyranny, restoration, and witchcraft. Yes, that one. He's also one that keeps the blood flowing through the city, as if he's running an abattoir operating in the back streets of District 23. Oh, why did I talk about that again? The scars of the city are deep, festering, much as he sees himself. Well, it's a grim, dark world set in a megacity that's the size of a few larger cities as we would know them, with a population that's more than half of what the current population of this world is. Run by a number of mega corporations ruling different parts of them as their fiefdoms, where democracy is a distant memory, if it's remembered at all. Where crimes like tax evasion and patents violation are dealt with via painful death in ways seen in more recent Doom games. So he's not wrong about that, is he? Then the voice revealed something interesting. They knew how to heal that city, but the road was so harsh that more blood was to be shed than it needed to be. They saw him as clumsy and kind, burying that path deep in his heart. Then Virgilius found a way to not get the blood on his hands. He saw that the children might be able to change the city for him. Those within the orphanage, his high sanctuary. He'd never confessed his sins to anyone, but his good intention he considered as larger than his sins, or at least as large as, which made his heart melt like snow. Then the voice mentioned water. From time to time, apply fertilizer. Is there a good amount of fertilizer? Or sunlight? Hang on! Isn't that what someone said before they... Well, then they mentioned that he took care of it. Feeling a huge flow. Yes, a huge flow, if only thinly. Then, Virgilius admitted that he wanted to plant a seed with potential, even if it was weak. Yes, I know, he did hide some things, but just because it couldn't be seen, it didn't mean that it couldn't be complete. He took care of it, like it was a tree in the sunlight. He told the voice that he wanted to live on his own behalf, not wanting the children to live with a heart that he didn't have. He didn't want them to live as inheritors of a syndicate that he butchered. That is, unless they were found by the sweepers first. A slender flow it might be, but he intended to achieve much with that. But he questioned if it would change the city. The voice didn't think that would work, as the children were just scraps to wipe the blood off his hands, the indulgence of his sins that he printed out himself. Ah yes, like a certain religious sect during the Middle Ages that, well, let's just say, handing those out had a consequence of a movement in northern Germany rising to dominance and challenging the European stranglehold over what is the truth. The voice was sympathetic and tightened after speaking of this, telling him that his sins were flooded because of that his heart was cracked, which allowed them to talk. He questioned himself when he started to feel that what he did was a sin, when he'd lost his way, that his house games were a last resort to protect his soul, which stopped his life with his guilt. That where he was going was daunting. The voice spoke of that place where there was a place to completely take him out, asking if he would like to hear everything. Virgilius knew that his heart was broken. The voice saw the tiniest crack. He felt a blade inside him that was hidden for a long time. The blade that had never stopped sharpening. This blade was his voice. As for the voice that was talking, they said that what he really wanted, it wasn't a play on the nursery school. And then he interrupted this voice, saying that he did everything, which silenced the voice. Yes, he considered himself the shell of being in the city as being hard. The blood wasn't enough to break that. The wounds couldn't be reached in that hidden place, even though he tried to dig into it and reach his wounded heart. He knew that better than most would. But the voice continued by saying that his great will, as he continued with his atonement at the orphanage, which was gradually buried, where even the traces ended. Virgilius disagreed. He never forgot that wish for a single day, to sever all of what was getting to him at any time. He kept trampling and burying that wish. Each time he had that feeling. The voice pointed out that burying that feeling was also painful. That wish left unhealed wounds in his heart. That it must have been daunting, exhausting, and suffocating, because the dream was too great to be a reality. that he doesn't have to hide it. He was creating what everyone had the potential to do, a world that he thinks is right. Virgilius didn't know what they meant. The voice went on to say that this world was one that he wanted to see with his own eyes, that they were helping everyone to paint the city their own colour. Okay, this voice might as well be giving names out, as it should be obvious who this is. At least to those that have been following through the story so far. Virgilius questioned this, as each of us has different colours, so they never paint them kindly. Well, it'd be dangerous if this was done with a psychopathic serial killer. It'd give them the opportunity to paint their colours all right. Different shades of red, all over the floor and walls. Well, regardless, if Virgilius knew of a method, he'd have done that before others. The voice then spoke that light is mixed with different colours, that he does his best to keep and paint his own. Through the difficult hardships, he fights them and overcomes them, even winning. It's how that world works. Virgilius wanted to break the shell of the city, to fight and control the situation, not to mention confront all that stood in his way, to tear it down and make a new world. He asked what ordeal the voice was talking about, willing to hear them out. The voice mentioned that what Garnet was going through was what all the others went through before they changed. Where his own egg digs inside to identify and establish. Virgilius asked what happens to those that get in that egg. They mentioned that they either come out or get eaten by sin and become nothing but dregs, which appears to be what happened with what he fought, as those that can't withstand the process become dregs, as they didn't decide to break out. Virgilius asked if it was different from distorting, at least the usual kind. The voice considered Jumsun to be a twist to this, but the children represented their sinful nature. So depending on the individual, they either distort like Maestro Jumsun, barely human looking, but still with their minds largely intact, or as dregs, little more than beasts, the face of sin, crying on the floor. The voice then went on to ask if it's strange, since when people reveal the shape and colour of their hearts, are said to have been distorted. Virgilius was familiar with the distortion phenomenon. After the light spread over the city the first time, yes, the white nights and dark days. The white nights, when the light spread the second time, added this new twist to things, where they go into cocoons or eggs before changing. It made the city bleed, and even those that tried to collect it bled themselves. Yet the voice sounded positive, as if this wasn't a problem, asking if they were just twisted, broken, and distorted. Virgilius didn't see it as normal, but the voice said, well, it saw otherwise and said that this was normal for themselves. It's the world outside that wasn't normal. They came to love themselves so they could see the world through their own eyes. Yes, another clue of who and what this is, as only this one would see the distortion phenomenon as a good thing. They noted that he became himself without being bound by the city's views and standards. Well, that's a rarity even for a fixer. They saw the form changing depending on the way it's exposed. They spoke of a genius somewhere in the light that thought differently. They didn't want to speak much of this one. Ah, yes. That one. Virgilius asked how they could know all that. Was the voice involved in this? Oh. They were all right. More than you can possibly imagine. Well, the voice confirmed this to be true. They also wanted to help them, as in everyone in the city developed their own colour, himself included. Virgilius noting that it was important to them to do this. Then the voice asked where he was heading now. They knew where. He asked where everyone was going. That they were obviously going somewhere. What kind of place does he keep looking for? He keep coming up with to generate that kind of feeling. Their opinion that people are going towards love, which was unfamiliar words for this colour fixer. The voice saw love, as in the heart for the other person above all else. Yes. That every act of thinking they love each other is a process to love them. The voice asked if they were going to have a discussion. The voice in his heart said no. They just have to listen. Speaking of this, like it's a light throw. They continued by saying that they're the only one that can fully understand and look at themselves. No matter, well, no others can truly understand or love who they aren't. Loving is the only true destination. Then he asked if this was true. Shouldn't he look at anything other than himself? The Voices Junior asked that, as they have to fight as they're human, using reason above emotions. That he had to fight in the most human form through clothes and tools, while maintaining a solid human form. But it's pollution. That moderation wasn't necessary. We're going through something couldn't reach him right away, going back and forth, which diluted it and made it forgotten. Virgilius acknowledges that it's how the people in the city deal with it. Then the voice continued that the tools made by him are broken. It might even break his heart. They have to have a love that can only be expressed through their own body. hitting their body through their hearts. All they have to do is love themselves. Virgilius understood this as everything, but him needs to be disregarded. The voice confirmed this. Virgilius was asking if they've always been pushing someone else to wake up in that way. This was a question that he's never thought of before. Apparently the voice did this because this is usually how they get those that they talk to understand each other. They're there to support them and lend their strength so that he and others can go on a new path. He felt warm and ruthless, focusing on loving himself and maintaining the strength to do this. He felt it getting hot around the back of his neck. Questioning if anyone has been offered this sweet solution in the city where individuals are meaningless in such a large scale, where it's okay to just look at yourself and nothing else. He wanted to close his eyes like that. However, he told the voice that they'll be happy now. Yes, that they'd feel full, a feeling of satisfaction that he's never experienced before. But this bliss will be temporary. Painting the world like Jumsun did, full of dots for instant gratification. It can't be painted all the way. He knew that it would be a thirst that would never be truly satisfied. He continued by saying that the distortion will result in that person only able to see 1 inch ahead within themselves. A short-sighted perception. Yes, that sounds about right. The voice said that it could be, but they saw his interpretation as his opinion and his colour. Her colour and the colour of others was different. She was pointing out another way. Virgilius saw this as cowardly. The voice then stated that Ver was judging them in terms of right and wrong. Ah yes, morality. It's quite blurry in that world. They then asked him if he thought that it's one of the urban aspects that he thought was hurt. Then Virgilius said that his eyes were open, thinking that there was something to gain from this conversation. The blade hidden in his heart was revealed, and he saw where it was pointed and what he had to face, but only if he sees the whole picture, beauty and ugliness. Yes, he saw the conversation the conversation he had as pointless. The voice asked him if their offer was so bad, expressing disappointment. Virgilius understood them as the cause of the distortion, although he wasn't aware of exactly who the identity of them was. Where after all these whispers, he asked, what do they do in the end? They told him that everyone has to fight everything to paint their own colour. She was human too. After lending him the strength to be himself, If he failed to reclaim himself, he would paint the color of the world as he saw it. That would not have the intended results. Yes, it's a little unclear as parts of what was being said here appears to have been redacted. But the answer made Virgilius close his eyes, seeing that the end of the last something, and then he spoke of beggars. This made him smile, seeing this as a joke. A world where you created your own world and endless thirst, fighting against all like a hungry beast. It wouldn't take him where he wanted to go, no matter how sweet that sounded. He goes the only way that he had to go, the only way that he was sure of, the pain and thirst he had experienced and endured so far, and what was to come. This has to be him. He told the voice that he was going the other way, the way of his choosing. The voice accepted this, as this was the color of himself. This resulted in a laurel crown of thorns appearing on his head, one with faded leaves, making blood flow down him, making his sins that he'll bear in the future more visible. Then a Roman armour-style pauldron formed on his right shoulder, with a red cape draped over his left shoulder. Yes, he was on a thorny road that he would pass in the future. A red carpet, a curtain of blood to capture the karma. He was being dragged down to the abyss, hearing many cries in it, the suffering of all within him. The pit itself was deep and dark. It was difficult to see ahead. He will get his hands on it and win. Ah yes, a reference to his namesake, Virgil, an ancient Roman poet. One of his works was the Aeneid. Which was centered around the city of Troy and the huge wooden horse. Yes, an ancient Roman poet that guided a 14th century man named Dante through hell, through all the circles of it. Ah yes, the Inferno. Quite fitting considering what's in the future of the Red Gaze. It was engraved in his eyes, to give the world the long-awaited paradise promised with an old friend. He fell into the hell of his karma, where he would rest alone, dripping in blood that was flowing down him, as his psychement was at least partially manifested. It appears that Virgilius has at least a partial psychement, or EGO, much like Philip and Xiao did, as it looks like it's part of a more complete version, as we can still see his outfits. What does the laurel thorns do? Well, one thing is certain about what this does, even if it is only a partial psychement/EGO. It will still provide him with a boost to his already considerable combat abilities. Probably not as much as Kali the Red Mist, but still quite considerable. Certainly until he can stabilize it, and we know that he won't distort, as the trailer for Limbus Company shows that he's still human-looking. Oh yes, and as for the voice, there are clues that keep pointing to it coming from Carmen. And yes, Virgilius, even though he doesn't know her name, understands her as the architect of the distortion phenomenon. The clues that point to her as the voice in this part of Leviathan are as follows. She spoke of salvation, on how to cure the disease of the mind, believing that everyone in the city was on a collision course to self-destruction, that she was aiming to make this cure and spread it all, to arm them, to fight against whatever is against them. Okay, that's an oversimplification, but I've covered this a few times already. Well, that was her aim, at least when she was corporeal. She was also described as one with a charming and otherworldly voice, full of charisma. She was certainly able to be quite persuasive to most, but clearly not Virgilius, as he was just trying to get as much info out of her as he could during their conversation. She also believed that one could only truly love themselves, and that the distortion was a good thing, as she sees this as the true self. Well, considering that she helped Kali, the Red Mist, to maintain herself when she had problems wielding the mimicry prototype, which ultimately helps her manifest a psychoment of her own. The Carmen that helped Kali was clearly not the Carmen that was distorting people left, right, up, down, front, and up the rear. She was even encouraging Virgilius to love himself and to not be concerned about anything else. Well, one thing we can't accuse her of being is discriminating. She also mentioned that the method of how to heal the city was a harsh road to go on, one that had much bloodshed, more than was needed. This was likely a reference to what happened that led to the Smoke War, along with the founding of Lobotomy Corporation, and her suicide that the death of Enoch was a catalyst for. She even mentioned a conversation that she had with her junior. This was likely a reference to Ian, and even implied that, like her, he's still in the light somewhere, but unlike her, he's keeping a low profile for now. It's even mentioned how all those that might have known him were dead. Yet Carmen somehow knew. Now, it's possible that Kali might have known him at some point in the past. Then again, it's possible that they might not have met, as colour fixers don't exactly meet up for drinks often, especially as some operate in different points in the city. Some of them are quite distant from each other, and it's not helped that some are actually quite psychotic. So those ones don't play nice with others. Then there's this desire to change the city. Yes, this coming from Virgilius, which he hoped to do through the children in the orphanage. A desire of his own that's not tied to power over others or money. Could this mean that he's a future ally of Angela, as their goals appear to be aligned with each other? As for the distortion, this appears to explain the difference between the three possible outcomes. 1. You decide to walk your own path and not focus on yourself at the expense of everything else, and manifest Psychoments. 2. You focus on yourself and love who you are at the expense of everything else, and then hatch out of the cocoon willingly. You become a distortion with the intelligence of the human that you once were, at least partially intact. 3. Much the same as 2, but you don't hatch willingly or quickly enough and become dregs, little more than beasts. At least that's how I understand it. As for Maestro Jumsun, I doubt that round 2, which will be in the next book, will be as balanced as what happened in round 1. I'll probably save some popcorn for this one, as it's probably going to be quite the fight ahead of them. Although there is one or two that's unaccounted for. Until next time. Hail the rabbit!